All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Energy Market Update. Special welcome to all of our channel partners able to make it today. What a difference a month makes, especially for prices and a lot of big news stories coming out. Before we get to that, just quickly, that's me on the left, John Vieira. We got our trusty legal disclaimer on the right. And today, covering the normal agenda of natural gas fundamentals, followed by market news, weather, and then close out with the market data. So taking a look at natural gas fundamentals, and we already were getting some repricing of curves earlier today, but we had estimates of 83 to 85 being put into storage, came out a little lower than that at 78. So not a huge miss, but putting some upward pressure on today's prices, especially with the excitement that we've seen over the past week as we're getting closer to summer. And then one thing to note, compared to last year and compared to the 5-year average, starting to get close to getting back to a 3 handle for last year and a 5 handle for the 5-year average. Basically, we've been in the 400s and 600s for several weeks. Still, plenty of gas in storage for right now, but this picture can change very quickly, just as it did approaching the end of winter 23-24. We're starting to get close, down in double digits, getting closer to zero, and then right back up into a couple hundreds worth of extra storage. What we're worried about already is winter 24-25, especially with where production's been recently for natural gas, the LNG picking up. Could this storage story really become a big factor by the time we get through what forecasted to be a hot summer, followed by one of the first cold winters we're going to have in the past couple of years? So I'm taking a look at where that is on the blue line with the green arrow. We're seeing the spacing compared to the gray get a little bit closer. Where beforehand, right during the dip, during withdrawal season, the blue line was well above the shaded gray, which is the max and min of the 5-year average, and then the 5-year average being the dark gray line. We start getting back into the gray, prices go up, get anywhere close to that dark gray line, we're going to really see prices moving up, and that could be something that we're seeing coming into summer, going into the fall. Early market estimates for this week around the same thing, still in the double digits, not in the triple, so 78 to 88 is the very early estimate for the next report. This is an updated chart. Only real difference is the down slope, very small, but again, this is in billions of cubic feet. If we look at the red arrow, just a little bit to the left of that used to be forecast, and it kind of went down a little bit sharper than expected. So that's less production of that natural gas, less supply, right? Upward pressure that we're seeing that way. And we're starting to see the story of some people letting leases run out because of this low in price environment that we have seen in the natural gas storage number being high, which has really kind of kept the lid on all the other bullish stories that we have out in the market. This storage has kind of been really keeping prices tempered before we get to the summer. Again, the story remains unchanged that LNG exports are hitting record highs. They're maxing out what we're sending abroad. Latest EIA graphic there in the middle. The updated numbers that they have published on the website, but they usually don't put a new picture, shows those numbers continue to go up. Yes, they do go up a little up and down, but overall the trend is it's going up. And then one of the big stories we've talked about is, the pause on some particular LNG export facilities, but kind of in a surprising move, the DOE Secretary Granholm coming out and saying it's only a pause, it's only to the non-free trade agreement countries. We have 40 to 48 BCF worth of permits approved for LNG facilities, which is even bigger than the doubling number that we were seeing that was coming in the next several years. So again, more supply going out the door, production not really increasing, so we're having a net loss of supply that way. Adding to those outside years, so making sure we're going over them with clients. And where is this gas going? It's going all over the world, but some price points to consider are the National Balancing Point in the UK, the Title Transfer Facility, the Virtual Trading Hub for the EU, and the JKM Japan Korean Marker, which has actually been kind of blowing out a little bit, so more gas might be heading to Asia as well. This was the updated May confidence interval, and for our channel partners joining us, just to note, they added the 12 back in on the y-axis. It used to have 10, but if you look where the arrows end up, they're pretty much in the same space on the up and down side. And we can see the black arrows being bigger than the red, the risk of prices going up and that growing as we go out into the future versus going down. And this is the way we want to apply to our regional graphs of what is the risk going forward, how much if it slides a little bit on the market, maybe save a couple mils, a couple cents. On the other side, I could lose my shirt if we really take off with some of these more bullish stories and the gas picture changes. And that's not to mention any of the rules that we could see coming from the federal or state levels. Took a little bit of reorder for these market slide for our channel partners, just because the story of the growing global conflicts and the sides starting to really be chosen. Just taking a look on the left, a picture of Putin and Xi when they had their meeting last weekend, saying new partnership, new era, no limits to what we could do together, where China was kind of sitting at the start of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, was kind of sitting in the middle and not as much publicly. And we'd seen that starting to grow with the defense minister of China a couple months ago coming out saying they're backing them. And this was a pretty big event. So Russia and China kind of teaming up that way. We've known in the past, Russia had the Iranian envoy with Hamas representatives. So it seems like sides in this global conflict. And from just the energy perspective, it's if things get worse, it's going to affect supply chains and supply, and that's what we're concerned about. A very politically charged subject, and we just want to be politically agnostic and talk about how does this affect prices. Well, if supply chains get worse, if tariffs go up, which we're going to get to in a second, can really just impact our prices. Other things going on recently are a map was floated coming from Russia to maybe adjust their maritime borders, which could affect the Baltic states or Finland. It has been deleted as of an hour or two just shortly ago. But that would be a further escalation in the region, and it would kind of play into, what China has been doing with sharpening where its borders or it wants to be with India and some of the surrounding territories around them. And then a huge story that's coming up this weekend, the meeting for the G7 finance ministers in Italy is coming up this Friday and Saturday. The G7 is looking to use frozen Russian assets to fund the Ukraine. So using Russians' own money and assets to basically have the war fought against them. So Russia is vowing serious retaliation if this does happen. We'll have to see what comes out this weekend. And then other stories we've covered before is, again, attacks on ports, attacks on energy sites, and we've seen those energy site attacks ramping up from both the Ukraine and Russia. Well, last time we'll see the slide in this format because the question we were wondering, it started just about 2 years ago, is what's going to happen when the solar waiver expires that President Biden put in place for the Chinese workaround of those 4 Southeast Asian countries that were basically rubber stamping Chinese solar parts and sending them here to avoid tariffs. We're going to get to that story in detail in a second. But the other biggest story is, the other points of contention between China and the U.S. One of the big things is the treatment of Taiwan, the South China Sea, as bright lines between us getting along. And we just have the new Taiwanese president taking office. And since he's taken office just in the past couple of days, he's already made some pretty strong statements against China. Well, China kicked off today one of the largest military exercises, the largest military exercise in a year around Taiwan, pictured in the bottom right, as a retaliation for those statements. So again, further escalation in the region. Wish I was happy reporting some happier news, but again, we're worried about, do these conflicts get wider and cause more complication, or do they start getting resolved? And a lot of these are unfortunately getting worse and really could start spilling into energy prices and supply. The other question is, the trade war directly, the US versus China. We started talking about in August of 23 that they started cutting off semiconductor chip parts and stuff when we started fighting about that and minerals. And then in December, when the energy fight started to ramp up, they cut off parts of graphene. And at the end of December, cutting off some of the technology for rare earth magnets and wind turbines and EVs. So the question is, does the relationship get better or worse, and where are we sitting? So the huge story that came out last week, again, was President Biden waives tariffs on the China and the Chinese associated solar products. Congress, both the House and Senate, voted to overturn that waiver. President Biden vetoes the waiver to let it stay in place, and we were having the deadline that was coming up on June 6th. And so a couple weeks before, he comes out with huge tariffs on China. So Chinese EVs, 25 to 100%, solar cells, 25 to 50, aluminum's up, lithium-ion batteries for EVs is up 7.5 to 25%. So these are huge increases to tariffs that are going on, and most of them are applying to the clean energy push of the administration that they currently are championing. So big update to the story is, where are we going from here? We're wondering kind of what the the deadline for enacting these tariffs, and it looks like some of them are going to be enacted by August 1st, and it could be more. That list seems to be growing by the day. And we also have the Biden administration to team up with Europe and other countries that are market driven to basically create what Secretary Yellen of the Treasury was calling a wall of opposition against China. So pretty strong words. Again, we've been trying to work this issue out with China for the past several months, with Yellen and Antony Blinken visiting China to try to come to some agreement. And we've also had China take us to the World Trade Organization about our trade practices that they say is hypocritical. So again, things don't seem to be getting better. China is not happy about this. This is also being planned to be discussed. These are the two big topics for the G7 coming up this weekend. So we might have big news when we come back in next week. So good reason to maybe get that deal done before we get out of here for the Memorial Day weekend. Is they're going to have those go forward. And China's also starting an investigation to basically do the same thing to European and US companies regarding POM copolymer, which is basically your plastics. And they're also they're floating ideas for retaliatory measures on energy. So again, things seem to be getting worse. What we're really worried about is, does China come out with any retaliatory measures on the energy? Because that could drastically impact prices if we stay on this clean energy push path. We also know that, they making things more expensive, it's going to make the projects to bring on renewable generation more expensive. So do those projects get built in time or pushed back? We already know that high interest rates, cost of money, and inflation have pushed back a lot of the offshore wind projects that we're expecting to have come online. On the other side of that, if components for EVs go up, it's probably going to make the EVs, electric vehicles, more expensive. And in normal times, a new product becomes more expensive. It has a slower adoption rate. However, the question still remains, are these going to be forced on citizens to drive, or is it going to be up to consumer choice? And that still remains to be seen. Another huge story is coming out about coal. So the assault on coal continues under the Biden administration. Again, it's not whether you like it or not, just simply what it's going to do for prices. And they just put out a proposal for the power basin, basically an area in Montana and Wyoming that produced around 40% of the US production in 2022 of coal. So almost half of the coal production in the US comes from this territory on federal lands. They're talking about ending all leases on the land, and it would go into effect 30 days from when they just proposed it, as long as there's no huge obstacles. So this is very quickly coming around the corner. A couple things to consider here. First of all, less coal supply available is going to up the input cost, which is going to up the output cost. So, that's a direct impact that way. The other thing that goes along with is the Biden administration's campaign that we've talked about in the recent weeks of new restrictions on coal plants, capturing 90% of emissions by 2032, and then going to EU and G7 meetings and saying, by 2035, coal plants should be gone. So it's putting a lot of pressure on coal plants from the federal level. And then we also have companies having to make best decisions for themselves. So if they keep getting beaten over the head and the economics are starting not to work for them, we might see accelerated retirements of coal plants. And we've seen this in the prices when we get down to the long-term graphs for PJM and ERCOT that rely more on the coal. ICE in New England really only has a little bit that's used during the winter, so not a big of a deal here. But seeing those outside years at 26, 27, 28 really moving up on this news. Question though is, the upcoming presidential election, do we stay on the Democrat path of full speed ahead with the changes, or a Republican path of kind of tapping the brakes a little bit? It's not going to stop everything, but slow down the changes that are coming. So with that answer being unknown, a hybrid strategy might be a strong option for clients to consider, at least getting ahead and getting some of this locked in. An update to the uranium story that we've been covering. So coal, one of the biggest suppliers of electricity generation. Now we're talking about nuclear, which you can see in the yellow, orange, and gold color on the left. Makes up usually the second biggest supply in a lot of our markets, with natural gas being the biggest source of supply for electricity. So this was kind of floated at the beginning of Russia invading the Ukraine, was cutting off all energy from Russia. But that hasn't been the case. It was really oil sanctions because the US could do without. and the EU has been still importing Russian natural gas, just not through the pipelines of the Nord Stream, by boat on LNG. Uranium, enriched uranium was one of the things the US had put on the table. They said, you know what, this could cost us billions of dollars. So let's kind of table that for now. But in recent weeks, with the pressure getting ramped up, it passed through and we've banned Russian uranium. The interesting thing is the Department of Energy has the ability, if there's no viable source or if it's in national interest, they can basically waive the ban. So is it just window dressing, or is it this a real ban that's being put in place? Well, the question is, that was the question, and now we're seeing actions taken by the government. They're requesting bids for proposal of around 3 billion domestically produced nuclear reactor fuel, and some of that bid is going towards basically restarting facilities here in the US, because the US has gotten very far away from the enrichment of uranium since the breakup of the Soviet Union. We rely on just several countries to do this for us. We only have one commercial enrichment facility currently operating in the US. So this is a big change coming as well. So we're talking about coal being changed, we're talking about nuclear being changed, and we've already talked at length about natural gas. So those are the three biggest suppliers of our electricity generation that are all getting kind of tinkered with, while at the same time we've faced many challenges with bringing on the offshore wind so far and some of the solar. That is the issue with China right now. So our takeaway is the future supply picture is becoming more uncertain. Make sure clients are looking at that outside value of years now while they're in certain places. Moving on to some of the global issues, taking a look at Israel and the widening web of countries that continues there. That was our question at the beginning of this. Was this situation going to stay very contained in a small area, or is it going to grow out to the surrounding bodies of water and other countries getting involved? Unfortunately, it's been the latter, where we've seen ramp upping pressure and positions taken by a lot of different countries around the world. One of the biggest things has been the shipping has been changed. Instead of going through the bodies around, some of them are now going around the south tip of Africa, so that's slowing down supply around the world. In recent weeks, we have had Turkey block off all exports and imports from Israel. Last week, we talked about India moving ahead with a deal with Iran after we sanctioned Iran for attacking Israel. So that's moving forward. We also have Ireland, Norway, and Spain just recognizing a Palestinian state. So that, I mean, further complicating things. Yes, many other countries in the world already do that, but I mean, for the kind of group that's been working together, this is a change there. And then we have news of the Iranian president, foreign minister, and other cabinet officials dying in a helicopter crash, whether that was an accident or planned. That's being thrown out there. And then we have a ceasefire agreement that was seeming to get close between Israel and Hamas. That seems like it's been squandered by an Egyptian intelligence official changing the terms of the deal. So again, it doesn't seem like this is getting better very quickly. The more chance it has to spill into bigger supply issues around the world as countries take sides. Jumping over, just taking a look at reality of what's actually being used in the short term for fuel source of generation in the short term forecast. If we take a look at the red arrows for solar and wind, we don't see those lines shooting straight up into the air, kind of just gradually increasing a little bit. And taking a look at the end of Q4 last year for ERCOT, MISO, PJM, ICE New England, slightly up, slightly down year over year for that actual renewable contribution. Capacity pass-through still is a very strong option in PJM and ICE in New England for now. And we know that since the new rules of subsidies for these clean assets and demand response and things like that that went in below those prices below the yellow line, the market has continued to come down, lending itself to a strong strategy instead of paying that risk premium. And especially if you can move your tag around, peak notification season is starting. It's just around the corner. One area just to be cautious of is DPL South, the green that we've talked about. And then just for the channel partners on the line, the June auction, well, the pushback auction for 25-26 year for PJM has been pushed back another 35 days to July 17th. So happening a month later, basically. ICE in New England, we know FCA 18 cleared a touch higher than previous 16 and 17, but within range of where it was getting priced on fixing it in. So capacity pass-through still being good strategy. The one kind of wrinkle here is that ICE New England is possibly looking to change the entire capacity market to be able to accommodate all these new rules for renewable supply. There's a vote looking to be soon. It's already been pushed back a little bit, so we're going to keep an eye on that. Taking a look at weather. So this was the April release of the May to July forecast. That was hotter than the month that was released previously. And you're kind of seeing, Texas looking likely above, Northeast PJM, NISO area looking likely above. This was the April release of June to August. And this is really the more important thing, just taking a look at what the difference between this screen and the next. The May release getting a lot hotter. So you're seeing, more Texas hot, expanding in the top part for the Northeast. So it's looking like really a top hot summer that's coming around the corner. Some are calling it top 5 that we've seen recently. So that really is starting to put pressure on prices. We're seeing some of that heat materialize already, and we're seeing some spikes in print with some getting into the thousands down in ERCOT. Then the big question through the year, which could be a double whammy that we're walking into, is hot summer followed by cold winter. So currently in the El Nino, moving towards neutral condition, and then looking to be moving towards La Nina by the time we get to next winter. So that usually can mean hot summer, cold winter. And these again are long-term fundamentals. We talked at length as we were approaching winter 23-24 that it's going to come down to Arctic blocking and other things. But this is kind of really setting the stage for the hot summer, cold winter currently. And people aren't really realizing it. The PJM, ICE New England prices for the winter are still at really great places compared to where they could be and where they were, during the fall, winter of 22, moving into it. Temperature this week are definitely moving up across the board, getting hotter in ICE New England. Nothing too significant yet. PJM getting a little bit hotter. This is without the humidity, so they're reaching the 90s on some of the days with that. And then ERCOT getting hot as well, starting to become those days where it's just 90 across the board and some hundreds. So the heat going that way. The quicker the heat gets here, the more LMP prices that we see spike, the higher the rest of the summer could go. Taking a look at the market data, taking a look at ICE New England, we were kind of up across the board. The summer had a jump and the winter had a jump over the. So taking a look at the balance of the year, so looking at June to December of 2024, and now more than ever, it's going to be more important to use like longer term graphs along with the 52 weeks because the old highs are disappearing and it's going to drastically change our graphs, which we're going to see when we get to the PJM. So June to December balance of the year was up 1.5 mils week to week. Now closer to the midpoint of the low and average, where it's kind of been hanging out near the low for ICE New England for balance of the year. Taking a look at calendar year 25, up 1 mil week to week, still closer to that 52 week average. So again, we've left the mid to late February lows for most of our markets. We're either getting closer to the average or in some cases hanging around the highs now. Taking a look at Algonquin gas, which has kind of been that last one to really make a move up, really kind of since February. It's been hanging out near that low, and now we're seeing a spike. Up 3 cents week to week, now closer to the midpoint of the 52-week low and average. Calendar year 25, which kind of had more of a gradual climb coming off those mid to late February lows, up 1.5 cents week to week. Again, close to that midpoint of the 52-week low and average. PJM, similar story with both the summer and winter getting kind of bumps in prices. So this is the graph I'm talking about, very different for PJM, right? It just hit a 52-week high. Why is that? The old highs are disappearing, right, as we've moved forward, and now this has also been on a smaller y-axis compared to some other smaller range it's been traveling in recently with all the kind of storage being okay, summer's around the corner but not here yet, and now some of those bullish stories get more legs. So very different picture for PJM for both balance of the year and calendar year 25. Because next week when we put this graph out, right, this is going to start to disappear and this is going to look a lot higher and show that kind of prices, if we draw it, have been moving up, although it's had crashes and rallies along the way. Taking a look at PJM gas using TETCO M3 balance of the year, up 3 cents week to week, now just below that 52-week average. So again, picking up below the 52-week average, great place, especially with things changing. Calendar year 25. PJM gas up 1.5 cents week to week, now closer to that 52-week average. So get it while the getting's good is kind of the message we're putting out there before that summer heat might get. And taking a look at ERCOT. Left the 14.4 on here, kilowatt or $144 a megawatt. That's what August had recently tested as of last week. It's kind of been moving up and down day by day on the heat and the LMP prints that we're seeing coming out for index. Taking a look at ERCOT, Houston load zone, balance of the year, off 2.5 mils week to week, but I mean, just hanging near that high. So it's testing the highs, kind of a little bit of a retracement. Where do we go from here? But looking at, I mean, the full year as we move forward, looking on the long-term graph, it's still not as high as it was before. Now, this also includes some of the fear of winter that was still there from Storm Uri, but prices are high right now. But the summer's coming. Texas is talking about, I mean, they might break a new record for May load, and that's a big concern, is like the increase of usage and the demand that we're going to see this summer. Taking a look at Houston loads, Houston ship channel, balance of the year, up 3 cents week to week, now closer to the 52-week average. So again, seeing everything kind of move up across the board, just a little bit of a come off of that ERCOT electricity. Houston ship channel, Cal 25 up 1.5 cents week to week. Again, now closer to the midpoint of the 52-week low and average, where everything was kind of hanging out close to the low just recently. And we know that Henry Hub, Houston ship channel being neighbors, pretty close together, pretty similar shape. But it matters where we are for locking in basis and taking a look. I mean, over the past 2 years and longer would show even more of this, is the space between the blue and the gray line on the left is a lot bigger than the space on the right. So we're talking about the space between here to gray or red to gray. And we're gonna look at another chart in a second, but this space is a lot smaller, and that's when you want to lock in at least the basis, if not take the whole thing and fix the whole thing in. So still a very good time to lock in the basis for gas. This is showing with the Houston ship channel, that's not really a big product in that market, but PJM, again, very strong option to lock in here. Red's below the gray currently. This is again on the wholesale. If you use the same amount every hour, by the time it gets adjusted for usage profile and then the retail rate, it comes out usually as a positive. But usually the red line on the wholesale market is always above the gray. And just recently it kind of dropped a little bit more. It's getting a little bit tighter. So take advantage of that now in the PJM for gas. Taking a look out in the future, ICE in New England, we saw 25 up 1 mil, 26 was pretty flat. In the outer years, 27 to 2032 up 1 to 1.5 mils. And then taking a look out in the future. Now, this is really one of the most helpful graphs for clients to see where prices have been to where they're going, especially for those outside years that are going to cover our terms, 12, 24, 36 as we go out into the future. Where did they sign last time? Where were prices? Find that spot in the graph, show relatively where the wholesale market was, and then show where we are now. Whether you want to use the high of where 24 hit, the high of where 25, and maybe the beginning of here. So downside risk to here if you want to draw it up on when you're talking with a client, either on paper or using over the web, and kind of the upside being either to here or here, right? A lot more chance of kind of losing from where the market is currently. Again, we're in different times than we were during that long-term graph of easy energy policy from 2016 until like 19, and change of the administration and the kickoff of all these global events. Taking a look at PJM going out into the future, right? We talked about the coal story, how that's putting pressure since that's a big supply. So really those outside years seen moving up that way, really kind of escalating as we go out into the future on some of those deadlines of where it's happened. And just seeing that on the line graph, how excited they got when the new coal plant story first came out. They went right up, kind of a little bit retracement on those outside years of 26, 27, but starting to move back up compared to 2025. So that's what we're saying, evaluate those outside years. It's going to depend on, of course, who wins the election, which might be the reason for the hybrid strategy to lock that in, but act as that consultant for a client. Lastly, taking a look at ERCOT going out into the future. Some people have this a mil or two wider on the outside years, but pretty close together, pretty tight trading. And we have 25 to 27 up a mil, outer years up 0.5 mil to a mil. Houston ship channel has really been changing every time stories have been coming about the LNG story, about when things get built and schedules. So this continues to be a changing picture that way. Again, ERCOT really has kind of gotten up there for looking at the outside years, but still some value in front of a very potentially hot summer. Lastly, just some points to consider. Not too much has changed except the top right, but we want to manage risk by evaluating how high or low the market can go from here. Because if you put in a lot at risk to just maybe save a mil or two, really, is that a really good bet for a client? Evaluating the longer terms, taking a look at these outside years, all these biggest stories that are going to be kicking in that really could impact prices. We're seeing those changes happen very dramatically in PJM, and there's other rules that are going to be coming through. So making sure clients take advantage of those sooner than later, because winters have been cheap. Get a cold winter, forget about it for the Northeast for future years, because that could have a knock-on effect. And again, right now for ICE New England PJM, be careful about the conversation for utility rates, because a summer rate is going to look a lot cheaper than a 12-month rate that includes the winter. So using that bar chart, monthly bar chart, to show clients so they can have the aha moment that yes, of course, if more expensive months are included, that rate should be higher. But if I'm buying the winter on the lower side, it's a great deal to really lock in that part. Then kind of the story is ERCOT and PJM are now hitting the 52-week highs. ERCOT because everything's been going up in the hot summer forecasted in high prints. PJM partially because the old highs are disappearing. So it's been moving towards a little bit higher, and it's at a smaller range that it's moved up. But basically all of our markets, the other markets, are off the mid to late February lows. So hoping that the market slides, that strategy seems to be going away from that pushback we've been getting from some clients. Lastly, the whole government push to go in clean and green continues. Election's going to decide if it's going to be full speed ahead or kind of tapping the brakes. But if not executed well and we lose fossil fuel supply, we talked about nuclear as well today, being more expensive as well in this mix, not being able to bring on the reliable, resilient, renewable supply in time really could result in problems over the next several years. So that's what's right in front of us. That's where our contract terms are hitting with clients. And lastly, optimizing the other price components that make up a good portion of the bill, capacity being a great option to optimize an ICE New England PJM with the peak notification program about to kick off, and talking about renewables and at least locking in that fixed data and becoming this consultant for a client. So thank you for attending. Please reach out for our channel partners to your account